Hi, my name is Michael Boldin. I'm the founder of the 10th Amendment Center, which you can find online at 10thamendmentcenter.com. Some big news for the 10th Amendment movement in the past week or so, and we're really starting to see a convergence of people from the left and the right in support of the principles of decentralization and limited constitutional government that the 10th Amendment stands for. First of all, over in Massachusetts, Attorney General Coakley filed suit against the federal government, stating specifically principles of the 10th Amendment as authorizing the state of Massachusetts to define marriage for its citizens as it sees fit. And then over in Alaska, Governor Sarah-Palin signed House Joint Resolution 27, which is a 10th Amendment or state sovereignty resolution, and has some pretty strong wording in it. It says that the federal government needs to cease and desist any and all activities that are beyond the scope of their constitutionally delegated powers. So it's really exciting to see that it's not just the right, or it's not just the left, but we're seeing people from across the political spectrum more and more showing support for these principles, recognizing the importance, recognizing the benefit of a state-by-state definition of whether it's marriage or medical marijuana or healthcare, whatever it may be. But we're seeing more and more of this across the country, and it's really very good news. A lot of people ask me specifically about things like House Joint Resolution 27 in Alaska, these state sovereignty resolutions. And the number one question that seems to come up is, well, what's the point of this? If it's just a resolution, it's not legally binding, so why do it? And I think there's a couple of really important things behind it. First of all, it gets a lot of attention. Now, so far, 37 states have seen these types of resolutions introduced, and there are now 7 that have passed them. And what this has done is it's brought media attention, mainstream media too. Everybody I've talked with, reporters from the LA Times to the New York Times, Bloomberg, USA Today, Huffington Post, Fox News, and the list goes on and on and on. We've seen a lot of reports on this. Many of them have been either neutral or relatively favorable in support of these principles. So it's gotten a lot of people talking about it in the media, although there probably could be more. We always want more. But it does have the benefit of giving me an opportunity to explain the principles of limited government and the Constitution to reporters. And when these reports come out, it gives you the opportunity to talk about it with your friends, your family, your neighbors, and on, that the federal government, as the 10th Amendment makes so clear, is to be one of limited and not unlimited powers. And there's reasons for that. I mean, think of it this way. Let's say you were king for a day and you had the ability to pull aside 10 people and say to them, okay, all of you, I'm going to give you totally unlimited power. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want. You'll exist forever, and there's no repercussions. You may have to deal with some nuisance of people complaining from time to time, but you can get away with whatever you want, and you can define your own rules. While I believe in the goodness of human nature at its very core, I recognize that with such great power, we'll probably end up with at least a few of those 10 people running absolutely wild and doing all kinds of nasty things. And the same rule holds for governments, and probably even more so because they're so pervasive in our society. If you give a government no rules, it will do eventually all kinds of things that you'll find completely repugnant to any ideals of a free society. So that's why it's important to have restrictions. Even if you don't necessarily like the rules, it's important to at least demand that the federal government follow some kind of limits. So it's great that we get a chance to talk about this. And the other thing, not to go too far off point here, the other thing is really important, is something that Charles Key mentioned to me in a podcast just a couple of weeks ago. And he said, well, let's look at it this way. Let's say you're a landlord and you've got a tenant who has not been paying their rent. Well, you don't just go in there with a truck one day and say, all right, pal, you're out of here. We're kicking you out right now. You first serve legally binding or some kind of legal notice or written notice to say, do this, or we're going to follow up with some kind of legal ramifications. And that's really what we see these 10th Amendment resolutions as this first step. It's serving notice to the federal government. And in fact, many of these resolutions actually say notice and demand to the federal government that they're not following the Constitution. Now, granted, if that's all that ever happens is a sovereignty resolution gets passed and nothing ever gets done to follow up to that, then it's almost pointless. Other than getting some media attention, it really doesn't bring us anywhere closer to the Constitution or expanding liberty. And we can report that, especially people who have visited 10thamendmentcenter.com for some time now, that there's a growing movement to follow up on these types of efforts. And in fact, some of the follow-up has come before the sovereignty resolutions. Everything from state-based medical marijuana laws to state laws resisting the Real ID Act to more recent laws from places like Montana and Tennessee exempting those states from some federal firearms regulations. There's follow-up all over the country. There's also a healthcare nullification ballot question being presented to the people in Arizona in 2010. The state of Florida is now considering a Firearms Freedom Act like the ones just recently passed in Tennessee and Montana. So there's a lot of action, a lot of activity to follow up or even take a step ahead of these state sovereignty resolutions. And the principle behind that is nullification. If you can nullify or resist a federal law on a state level, you can actually have real good effect, especially when other states jump on board. As we see with medical marijuana, it started out with California, and now some years later, there's 13 states that are just resisting the unconstitutional federal drug war on marijuana. And we can see some real positive, peaceful developments by nonviolently resisting and nullifying federal laws. And before I go today, I did want to mention a couple of media updates. I just did a couple of interviews, one with the Omaha, I believe it's the World Herald, and also with The Economist from London. So look over the next few days for some reporting on the 10th Amendment movement in those publications. And then on Thursday, I'm doing 2 radio interviews, one with the Real Truth, R-I-E-L-L, Truth show out of Colorado, and just after that with a Deadline Live at deadlinelive.com. And then on Friday, we're resuming our 10th Amendment Center podcasts, and the subject is going to be nullification with one of my favorite writers and authors, Thomas J. DiLorenzo. I'm really excited for that interview. So make sure you tune in for those events, and keep checking out 10thamendmentcenter.com for updates and news. And thank you for all your input and feedback. Appreciate you tuning in today.